For Polity in Johannesburg, I'm Darlene Creamer. Author Gerhard Swart joins me to discuss his book, Hope Arising, the story of the South African JOULE electric vehicle and why it still matters. This is more than a story of a car. It's a story of a belief in a better future, of the engineers and entrepreneurs who dared to build it, and of the powerful lessons left in its wake. Gerhard, your book takes us behind the scenes of the JOULE project, one of South Africa's most daring engineering ventures. To begin, could you tell us about your father's influence on the way you solve problems and your educational and professional background, and how a meeting between four friends in 2004 set the JOULE journey in motion?
I grew up in Zimbabwe and lived on a farm. And in those days, there were sanctions there, and it was quite hard to farm. My father couldn't just take his broken tractors or equipment and have it repaired elsewhere, or he couldn't always purchase what he required. And so I saw him as a young lad, really being very inventive on the farm, doing whatever it takes to solve the problems at hand, even making his own farming equipment. And I was able to experiment myself and try things, and he trusted me even to take his binoculars apart and not being able to put them together again. And then, having been inspired at school also by teachers and stuff, I just wanted to study engineering. And it was a big privilege to study at the University of Pretoria and go on from there, working firstly in the defense, learning so much on these big defense projects, then the SALT telescope. And at the end of that, four of us said, okay, what next? And we'd worked together very well. And Kobus Meyering, who was the project manager, he really had been doing some research and saw that the energy landscape was about to change, that there were many factors that influencing the way we use energy, and transport is a major consumer of energy. And he felt that the automotive industry was not noticing, and that there was an opportunity for us to come up with something new and, an electric car at that.
Those four friends went on to establish Optimal Energy, the company created to develop a fully electric vehicle. Your journey began with the approval of a 15 million rand funding application in 2005, but the funding came with more complications than expected. Could you explain the conditions attached to that funding?
Yes, we applied for a grant from the Innovation Fund, now called TIA. And normally it would have been a grant. But everybody got so excited about this opportunity that they decided, no, the government needs to take shares in Optimal Energy. And so from day one, it was not just the founders, it was also, government officials sitting around the table. Initially, that wasn't a problem. We carried the same vision. We wanted to, make this electric vehicle venture work. They had plans to sell out their shares very early in the life of Optimal Energy. And we managed to spend the 15 million and attract even more from the IDC. And that was the start of the journey of Optimal Energy.
In 2005, then President Thabo Mbeki was championing the idea of an African Renaissance, a belief in Africa's ability to shape its own future, free from corruption, instability, and dependency on the West. But by 2008, he was forced out of office when Jacob Zuma became leader of the African National Congress. How did this political shift impact the trajectory of the JOULE project?
We had a lot of support from government. It was up to 2008. And even after that, for a while, it was very clear that the government supported us. They wanted this to work. And even around the World Cup football event, there was a lot of support. But tangible support in terms of funding was limited through the whole process. However, when President Zuma came into power, we noticed a shift in attitude. There was, I think, a lot of fear going around. People were less willing to make those risky decisions that would support us. And there was a lot of talk, but less action. And then even within our own shareholders, we saw changes. We saw people becoming more politically minded, a lot more constrained in the ideas, and trying to shift us away from the vision of actually creating a whole automotive industry in South Africa. So that slowed us down. And then eventually, that created even more problems.
The JOULE was designed to be a serious user-centric vehicle and was described as the darling of the Paris Auto Show in 2008. Could you speak about the research, engineering, and innovation that went into its development and the contribution of designer Keith Halfett?
Yeah, so this is, for me as an engineer, the exciting part of the journey. We knew that this was going to be hard. So, as engineers, all four of us had worked on complex projects before, and we knew that South Africa could do this, but we also knew it would be a huge challenge. So the starting point was really getting the right team together, getting together those engineers that would be able to do this, working with universities to do the technology research, working with local and international partners that would supplement what we were doing and would be able to bring the real expertise in key areas that we didn't have. So while we were building the company, we were, also doing the initial prototypes. We went through 3 prototype stages. Prototype 1 was really looking at the technology, putting together the electric motors with the battery, understanding the vehicle platform that we felt we should have, which is different to most cars out there because the battery comes first, not the engine. And at that time, Keith Halfett joined us, and we had gone down the path of what you would maybe describe as an engineer's car. It was very functional, very practical, but probably not a car that most people would find attractive and want to own. And Keith Halfett was the chief designer of Jaguar in his day, and the iconic XJ220 was one of his creations. And when he joined us, he said to us, no, but this car needs to be desirable to the consumer. And desirable means it needs to look good. It needs to have quite a lot of other features that we had not really considered important. And so that was a whole transformation of what we were doing. And then what he created, we took as a model to the Paris Automotive Show. And with our requirements and the specifications we developed around this and our ideas, and it was so well received that we realized, wow, this is not just for the South African market. This is something that really can go big. But also at that time, our shareholders said, this can be so big, let's do this properly. And we realized that to make a real business out of it, you can't make money out of selling just a few cars because they're too expensive to manufacture then. You can't sell a normal passenger car for R1 million or 2 million rand. That's what it would cost, if you're only making small numbers. So we decided to come up with bold and ambitious plans. And we went on to the second prototype and then eventually the third prototype, which was a final, what we called almost a market-ready car. It wasn't ready to sell, but it was demonstrating to the market what we had in mind. And we had 4 of them as road-worthy prototypes demonstrating our technology. We had the engineering partners on board to actually help us with the manufacturing process and the final design process and all the safety testing and all of that. So we were very excited by that whole technology journey.
By 2010, a series of setbacks left optimal energy in crisis and ultimately resulted in the hostile takeover by the Industrial Development Corporation. Could you take us through what happened during that period?
Yes, it's ironic that in 2010 was also when we finished those third prototypes, and they were tested by Car Magazine and found to be, very good. And so there's a whole series of things that happened. Some of them we probably should have seen coming. The first one being that our shareholders were worried about the amount of money that we would need to spend to actually take this car into the manufacturing process. As engineers, we know that you do the initial prototype development, but to get from there to having the factory to make not just the components, but also assemble the car and do everything in a profitable, repeatable way is a huge effort. And we call that the industrialization stage. And most funders in South Africa don't really understand that stage of development, and it's called the innovation chasm in the technology field. And our funders were exactly falling into that trap. They thought, okay, the prototypes are there. That must be a short step to get that onto the market and start selling them. And so when we were explaining to them that this was going to take probably another 4 to 5 years, that we needed several billion rand to do that, they were concerned that this is not feasible. But if you think that's a big number, you also need to consider that the South African government was paying the automotive industry a huge subsidy every year, also to the tune of billions of rand, just to stay in the country. So that was, I think, the major thing that changed. With that, there were challenges from the shareholders and our board in the way we were spending money. Not everybody agreed that we should be building these PEV, third generation prototype cars. And yeah, I guess if you really want to know the detail, you need to read the book. It's not that easy to explain it this quickly.
Over the years, there has been much speculation about why development of the JOULE was stopped. Please could you address some of the key reasons?
Yeah, so as the concerns around the funding was increasing, the IDC, who was our main funder at that time, they had lost money also as a result of the switch from President Mbeki to President Zuma through the cancellation of the PBMR nuclear project. And so they said to us, they were not going to continue investing unless the government actually came to the party with some real money. And we'd been promised various subsidies. We'd been promised new policies to support South Africa's electric vehicle, but nothing had actually materialized. And so they gave us a deadline. They said, unless you have this support from government by a certain date, they would not fund us anymore. We tried several things. We had always got verbal support from government. We met with ministers. We tried various things, in terms of applications for funding. But it was a huge step for government to take. And so they were either just slow or fearful or just not supporting. We would never know. But we ran out of time, and the IDC stopped their funding. And although we had other ideas like doing electric buses and whatever, I think, were already so worried that they weren't willing to fund this any further. So yeah, then it came to a standstill, and that was it.
In 2011, Car Magazine argued that the JOULE project had the potential to do South Africa a whole lot of good, from job creation to developing local engineering expertise and homegrown technologies for the global market. They also warned that it would be especially galling if we ended up buying a version of it from another country after doing all the groundwork. Could you reflect on this assessment and what it reveals about the broader lessons of the JOULE story?
Yeah, it is particularly sad to see Chinese electric vehicles in South Africa and to see the incentives now there, and realize it could have been a South African venture, making some money, creating those jobs and being able to even export the car globally. And that was, for me personally, one of the major motivations behind the whole JOULE exercise was more of the job creation and the economic impact than, looking at sustainability and that sort of thing. I mean, that's important stuff as well. And I believe that potential has not gone away. I think doing an electric car in South Africa is probably not viable anymore, so I wouldn't resuscitate the JOULE program. But there are still so many opportunities. The engineering expertise is still there, the innovation, the creativity, the pioneering spirit that South Africans are known for. And I really believe that doing big complex projects, which are hard, are still something that South Africans are good at. And in Africa, there's such a demand for up and coming things. The world, I'm sitting in the UK now, the world sees Africa as the market of the future. And South Africa is there on its doorstep. It's part of it. South Africans understand the African market better than the Europeans do or the Chinese do. And I believe there's just so many opportunities. And that's largely the heart behind the book, is to say to our engineers out there, you can still do this. Let's still be ambitious. Let's not all run off to faraway places. Let's actually do something. And for our funders and for our government, do what it takes to make this work.
Finally, how do you see electric mobility unfolding in South Africa in future? And what opportunities this could create for engineers, manufacturers, and for cleaner motoring?
Yeah, so I think having a South African automotive brand is still a good aspiration to have. I think it's harder now because of all the Chinese cars that have come in, and the automotive policies that the government has in place favors the OEMs. It's not actually establishing, I think, the ecosystem that's necessary for a startup like this. But if you go back to probably the 70s, the whole Korean automotive industry was kickstarted through the government by really partnering with the existing automotive companies and establishing local manufacturing and then later engineering expertise and local brands. And I think it's still a journey South Africa could get onto, but it's going to be hard now. And I think for electric motoring, South Africa has many challenges. The distances are far, but I have a friend who's owned an EV now for several years, in South Africa, and he just raves at what it feels like, what he's able to do. I've been driving an EV here in the UK since 2017, and if possible, I would never go back to a petrol or diesel car. It's just so convenient and so nice to drive. But you have to adapt to it. It has limitations, and particularly if you're driving long distances, that's a challenge.
That was Gerhard Swart discussing his book, Hope Arising. Visit the Polity website to access more author interviews, news, and information updates. If you haven't already, subscribe to Polity's email services, as well as our new monthly Polity Bookshelf email, to stay informed about the latest news and Polity Bookshelf developments.